All right. I get a lot of questions. What camera do you use? Some people think I have a red Komodo or a Black Magic or even a Lumix on my quad. No, the only cameras I used so far is the GoPro 8. And let's distinguish between two types of cameras. Or I mean, it's the same camera, but you will see why I want to differentiate. One is a naked GoPro, and one is like the GoPro which you can buy. If you go with like 5-inch quads, long-range quads, you can mount the entire GoPro on the drone. That's not an issue. You have more powerful motors. That's okay. If you want to go with light setup, like under 250 grams, like this one, this combined freestyle Cinewoop one drone, and where maybe the future is going because we have more regulations regarding weight, you just put a naked GoPro on a TPU mount, and it's absolutely lightweight regarding this like big thing here. Of course, the downside is you need to build it. GoPro 6 was easier. Now with the GoPro 8, it's harder. But basically, what you want to go forward, and there are a lot of like descriptions in the internet how to do it, or maybe like buy it already, like built, is like a naked GoPro. This thing here is like an ND filter, like which is already like part of that naked GoPro build. When it comes to camera, they're like different cameras. GoPros, Insta360, there's like the Osmo Action. What's the difference? So that's like my experience, and I speak for myself. So I have seen that the Osmo Action gives like a great image. It's a little bit desaturated. I just love the look. What I have experienced there is when the quad is not perfect tuned, you're gonna have micro vibrations. So the biggest vibration you get on a quad are like this mid-throttle vibration if you cruise. And these are like tiny little vibrations. But the thing is, if you put the stabilization on the Osmo Action, for example, it becomes very jittery because the stabilization is not used for micro vibration. That's why maybe to start off, it's not ideal for you. Even the image looks great. The video I did in Siargao on the Philippines is done with that Osmo Action, but most of the footage, I really couldn't use it because of that jittery image. The next one is the Insta360. Really nice option because you can basically put modules on like wide angle, a 360 lens, or you can have the nice 1-inch sensor. And they even have, they're aware of FPV, so they even have like an FPV mode, and the stabilization is like really good. So I did some good experience with the Insta360. My personal favorite so far was the GoPro 8. I know a lot of people use Real Steady. I also use Real Steady for stabilization. And when we talk about an external stabilization tool like Real Steady, you have to know one thing. GoPro 6 works fine. GoPro 7 doesn't work very well or at all. You need a specific mount, a soft mounted here, even like different to this, that you don't see the vibration. Then GoPro 8 works like really good, and GoPro 9 of course works also really nice. I will explain more about this Real Steady in the specific Real Steady section, but just to give yours already some pre-information. So Real Steady is an external stabilization based on gyro data which the GoPro records. GoPro 6 and GoPro 8, they record a lot of gyro data. That's why the stabilization is good. GoPro 7, as I've learned or heard, is it doesn't record as many gyro data. That's why the stabilization with the external tool is not really good. Also, if you want to use the in-camera stabilization, GoPro 8 works already pretty nice. I mean, I've done a lot of flights, and sometimes also the external software has its limitation. So definitely the higher you go with GoPro versions, it's getting better. Also, GoPro, as I've heard, is they bought Real Steady. That means that the GoPro 9 has now a really good, they don't call it FPV mode, but they have like a really good stabilization, which works it's almost like you now have Real Steady, the external tool, built in GoPro 9. So when you fly FPV drones with the GoPro 9, you get great in-body stabilization, much better than with the GoPro 8. If you're planning to use anyways an external tool like Real Steady, so you don't want to have the great inbuilt kind of Real Steady-like version by GoPro 9, I would say you go with the GoPro 8. It's almost like 150 to 200 bucks cheaper. Plus, you anyway smooth the footage externally. And to be honest, this 5K, there is not a massive difference to like the 8K. The big difference for me, between GoPro 9 and GoPro 8 is when it comes to the stabilization. And when you anyways plan, as I said, to do the stabilization external, I would go with the GoPro 8 and save the money, because if you do FPVs, you need a lot of GoPros. I crashed 3 or 4, or including losing the drones. So a downside of the GoPro 8 is that it's like the thing is built as one piece. So you have to buy, when you want to buy an ND filter, you have to put a clamp on and then you attach the ND filter. The thing is, if you lose the drone, you cannot use the other ND filter. That's the downside. A big advantage of the GoPro 9, where you have like the front part again as more as a module where you can basically replace it. So if you lose one GoPro, you're not going to lose all ND filters, or they become useless. Quality on the 8 is great. For the settings, I will also say more in the Real Steady section. But what I can tell you is what I record is I record 4K, 30 frames per second. I use 4:3 format, which is more kind of a square-alike image, and that's a necessity for Real Steady. If you record the 16:9, it doesn't work. So keep in mind 4:3 and stabilization off. These two things you need to have, and GPS data off you need to have, that it works with the Real Steady tool. So what I used so far, and I haven't used any other settings, is 4K, 30 frames per second. I have stabilization off. I have the 4:3 format, and then I use for I will all put it in the description, so you have it nice summarized. I have like sharpening on high. The reason for that is when I run it through the external software Real Steady, it is doing some like warping, some adjustment, so it loses sharpening. And then when you add some motion blur in post-production, you're going to lose some sharpening. So I want to start with a higher resolution. And for me, I found it difficult if I go with sharpness like soft or like low to bring back that level of details. Then shutter speed. Of course, if you record 4K 30 frames per second, you want to have a shutter speed of 60 and above, so 1/60 and above. That's really good. And then what I also use, I use mostly 5500 Kelvin from white balance, and I use native native for the color profile. So they have a little bit of, or like the image format should be flat. That's what I wanted to say. So what you also have to keep in mind is you want to have, and that's really important also for the external tool Real Steady, and also when flying, you want to have ISO locked 100. So min and max ISO is 100, and you want to have the shutter speed locked. Before I said I record with 30 frames per second, so you want to have a shutter of 60s or above, but you have to lock it, because I've seen that my Real Steady freaks out when I have my shutter speed not consistent, because then the camera chooses the shutter speed, and then like the stabilization, there were some parts in the smooth footage which wasn't just nicely, it was jittery, and they could have solved it by having the auto shutter. There's only one reason where you can have the ISO dynamic, and that's when you fly from outside to inside. You can maybe have a one take, you fly from outside the hotel, inside the hotel through the hall towards the room, and then I would put the ISO on auto, or I would limit at 400. So basically the camera then adjusts. That's really important. But make sure for real steady, it must have like shutter like fixed. The shutter fixed, and you want to have 4K 30 frames per second with a picture format of 4:3. That's what you need. If you want to go with like a GoPro 9, or if you want to use in-body stabilization, then you, of course, I would do 16:9, and then you can record 4K 60 frames per second, and that works fine, especially now with the GoPro 9. That's a beauty. I can only recommend that. All right, we talked about cameras. Now I want to quickly add something more. Unfortunately, I lost a part from an ND filter, but basically what I want to tell you is always try to use an ND filter. I have these by Polar Pro. They come with the ND8, they come with the ND16 and the ND32. And they have also like this piece, how you basically attach the ND filter to the GoPro 8. It's like with a magnet. Don't worry, it holds. I've never lost one, unless you're gonna lose your drone. No, you lost your drone. Okay. All right. One thing I want to add to the camera section is always try to use an ND filter. I have here the ones by Polar Pro. That's the one I use on my Mavic drone as well. I always use their glass. I'm really loving it. Not sponsored or anything. Really happy with the products. They come with the ND8, ND16 and ND32. And what an ND filter is doing, basically, I said before with the settings, if you have 30 frames, like 30 frames per second, 4K 30 frames, you want to have ideally with the shutter rule 1/60, so twice the frame rate, yes. And the thing is, if there is like a super sunny day, if you use 1/60, it's way overexposed. So what do you do to encounter that? You basically take an ND filter and you put it basically on your GoPro. It's like sunglasses, and with this glass, it basically makes it exposed nicely, even you use a low shutter speed, and that's exactly what you do. So I would say, if it's very sunny, bright, I would go with the ND32. If it's like okay bright, I go with the ND16. If it's a little bit before sunset or sunrise, an ND8 is doing a really good job. And if already like the sun is about like to go down and you already have some shadows, I go without an ND filter, and that solved most of my problems so far.